Hello and welcome to Insight Out with Assaad Mohanna. I'm Michael Gaines and glad you are joining us today as we continue our ongoing conversations, bringing you expert perspective and analysis on the world of energy. So glad you are a part of today's conversation. We are really looking forward to our guest today. We have the opportunity to talk with Mike Garvin, who is the Senior Vice President of Operations at Patterson-UTI Drilling Company. So it'll be a really great conversation, getting his perspective on things going on, as well as sharing his insight along with Assaad Mohanna. So definitely glad that you're here and look forward to having you be a part of today's conversation. So speaking of being a part of our conversation, I want to go ahead and bring in Shelby Dumaine to talk about just that and how you can have your questions, comments, or insight shared right here on the show. Hey, Shelby, good to see you.
Hey, Michael, it's great to see you too. I'm so glad to be back here on the show after our short break. And yeah, if you're watching at home and if you would like to get involved in the conversation, there's a couple different ways you can do so. The first is simply by commenting below. So if you have a question or even a comment and want to just be part of the topic in the conversation, you can let us know on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, wherever you're watching. Comment that at any point in the show, and we'll try to feature you while the conversation's happening. And if we don't get, we'll do a Q&A at the end where we'll answer a few more of those questions. So we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we can, but we look forward to seeing everybody's comments. And later on, if you maybe have a question on a past episode or this week's episode, you can reach out to Assaad Mohanna on LinkedIn. So he's tagged in this post, but you can also find him by searching Assaad Mohanna on LinkedIn, and you can just send him a quick message there. And I know he's pretty great at replying to those, so he can help you out there. But like I said, for today's show, if you'd like to get involved, simply comment down below. I'm in the comment section the whole time, so I'm looking forward to seeing everybody's messages there.
All right, great. Thanks, Shelby. All right, well, as always, we're going to go ahead and transition into our week in review and get some insight on things that happened in the world of energy over the last week. And of course, to do that, we have Assaad Mohanna, NOV's Director of Business Strategy. So Assaad, it is great to see you. As Shelby mentioned, we did have a little bit of a maybe a forced break, but nonetheless, glad that you're well and good to see you.
Great to see you too, Michael. It really feels odd when we miss a week. Unfortunately, it was for a natural disaster reason, but coming back to the show always feels good to be on.
Great, good. Well, of course, I know that things are always moving, that things are never stagnant in the energy world. And while I know that we had a little bit of spotty last week, I know that we still kept up with some of the happenings. So what were some of the items that caught your attention last week?
Yeah, so we as we talked in the last couple of shows, Michael, we had been tracking earnings calls and earnings reviews for the fourth quarter of 2020 and the full year of 2020 from various companies. And that was not a change for the last couple of weeks either. What we've seen is that our industry is on the mend. We're seeing more and more companies come out and say, yeah, we're probably seeing the bottom. We're very close from it. In fact, if we could pull a little graphic on some indices, and I'll do a quick introduction of what this is, trying to introduce some sort of a tracking method of the market, give visibility on 4 different things. Might end up having to zoom in on some of these, but top left is WTI and Brent and how they are. And we don't go too far back. Like if we want to compare to 10 years ago, probably wouldn't be relevant. We're only comparing to pre-COVID till date. And what we're seeing with WTI and Brent, clearly we see that big dip in April 2020. But really tracking each other very closely. But what's amazing there is that we're pretty much where we were prior to COVID. So I think the last numbers for WTI was $61 and $65 for Brent. Top right is rig count. Again, it's one measure of return to activity, although you could argue otherwise. What we've seen from 2014 till date is that our rigs are becoming a lot more powerful and capable in terms of performance, in terms of delivery, in terms of uptime. So half of the number of rigs we needed before 2014 could deliver the same number of rig wells after all these synergies, all the improvements and performance optimization. And you can also see there that we're also at an increase, not quite to where we were, and I'm not sure we're going to get there. I think drilling contractors have found ability to do a lot more with less. At the bottom, more general economic indices. One's S&P 500, and we're seeing that that's going up. The market is healthy. The stock market's healthy. And maybe to kind of reflect a bit of a broader economic lens is the bottom right, where we show the weekly economic index. We've shown this once before. That's an index that the Federal Reserve Bank of New York puts together that incorporates 10 different indicators of real economic activity that reflect the U.S. economy. And that includes consumer purchasing behavior. It includes measures of labor market conditions, so unemployment insurance claims. It includes things like production of U.S. steel and electricity, even fuel sales. So an all-encompassing, as you can see there, Michael, we're not quite back to where we were, although the trend is clearly upwards.
That's so that's good to see, like you said, that those the incremental positive trajectory. Of course, everyone's looking for a vertical line back to where we were historically. Of course, that's not the case, but incremental progress is always welcome. So that's great.
And of course, we can't ignore the fact that there was a once in a decade occurrence happened in Texas, a big freeze. It isn't as unprecedented as the media originally put it. I think there will be a lot of lessons learned for those not living on planet Earth. Texas was hit by an Arctic freeze storm last week, which put everything to a stall. Unfortunately, it was devastating for millions of people, billions of dollars of personal property lost. So I think the infrastructure will take some time to recover. The question is, how do we prevent that from happening again? Looking back at history, this is not the first time. We've seen worse in the last 40 years or so. So the big question is, what needs to be done? A good example was El Paso, which is a little city at the very west side of the state of Texas. And what El Paso did in 2011, when they saw something similar, is spend about $5 million to winterize their electric grid. And El Paso last week was one of the few cities that saw very minimal outages. So it's really an economical question on what can be done. And I think it's a reminder that our industry could play a big role in making technology like that economical, that gives access to energy, whatever the source, and really collaborate during the energy transition, or what it really is, energy collaboration and diversification.
Great. Yeah. And to your point, hopefully we're able to have some positive outcomes and infrastructure considerations moving forward. So to your point, a lot of conversations that are starting up now, and look forward to seeing what comes of that. So great. Appreciate that, Assaad. All right. Well, to that point, we're actually going to go ahead and pivot over and introduce today's guest. So we have the pleasure of having Mike Garvin, who is the Senior Vice President of Operations at Patterson-UTI Drilling Company. A little bit about Mike. Prior to joining Patterson-UTI, he spent 3 years with INSCO as a Senior Deepwater Operations Manager. Prior to that role, Mr. Garvin spent 27 years with Global Santa Fe and its predecessor and successor companies, Global Marine and Transocean, holding various operations and support leadership positions. Mike earned a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering from California Polytechnic State University and has accumulated a total of 43 years of experience in the upstream sector of the energy industry, exploring and drilling for oil and gas and geothermal energy, both land and offshore. So quite a background and a wealth of experience. So we're very honored to have you. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Appreciate that, Michael. I'm happy to be here. Happy to provide some personal opinions, and I'm a self-professed expert on nothing. So I hope your hopes aren't too high.
Well, neither Assaad or I are experts in anything as well. So you're in good company.
So with me, we get what you pay for.
Yeah. I'll jump right in, Mike. Just talking about the markets and your perspective. I think what we've seen the last year is a lot of really good companies struggle, and perhaps still are. You recently announced you've probably seen that bottom as a company. We're on the way to recovery. How has Patterson-UTI weathered the storm?
Well, it's a good question, Assaad. I think we've actually done well. Been very disciplined in getting those results. This business is all about discipline. And Patterson has always been a very fiscally conservative organization. In fact, I remember back in the last upturn, we were criticized for having a lazy balance sheet. So we've always been very fiscally conservative. We've maintained a strong balance sheet. We've really focused on that balance sheet. And I think other organizations that have that same fiscal discipline have done better during this downturn. And so it's just part of this industry. In order to be successful and have a long-term strategy, you have to have fiscal discipline.
Sure. Yeah. And hopefully that discipline is entrenched in the companies that didn't have it before the crisis, because that's probably what's going to help everybody get out. Mike, I know you have experience in a wide array of applications. I want to get your thoughts. We always compare onshore to offshore. What are the two? How are the two businesses common, and how are they different? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think they're both really based on scale. In order to be successful, you got to have enough rigs running and generating enough margin on every rig every day to support your operations. It used to be that we really just had to keep the equipment running and keep our employees paid. Things have changed in the last 40 years. Those things are still critically important, but we also have to be able to invest in quality systems, quality processes, right, and in emerging technology. And so you have to be able to do that in both onshore and offshore. We report our financials on a cost per rig per day, and our revenue on a cost per rig per day, and margin on a cost per rig per day. So we're very, very focused on making money every day. I think some of the differences, the onshore business, in my experience, tends to be maybe a bit more entrepreneurial. And what I mean by that is, when it comes to services and technologies, the barrier to entry onshore tends to be much lower. Therefore, it tends to be a more competitive landscape. There tends to be more people offering goods and services, and so it just drives up the competition. I think onshore also, we tend to be maybe a little bit more risk tolerant when it comes to some of these things. Yeah. As an example, onshore, you have quite a few drilling contractors, such as Patterson, that we have our own proprietary rig operating systems, and we're actively developing our own applications for our rigs. Where in the offshore sector, you see they tend to more rely on third-party and OEMs, such as NOV, to provide these services.
Right. With that differentiation between the two, I think on point, kind of echoing what you're saying, the scalability is a big factor. The ability to run what Patterson's at 60 plus rigs today, And I really like the fact that intentionality of tracking the cost per rig per day, the margin per rig per day, and I've seen some of that here. It's just so on point. So the main driver for improving overall performance. I want to circle on the technology side and how that ties into scalability. When you're offshore and you are dealing with third parties, yes, it is more justifiable, but you get to be a little bit more risk. Take a bit more risks, do your own thing on land. How's that scalability apply when it comes to technology?
It's interesting because evolving technologies are the future, and if you're not focused on that, you're going to be behind. The average well on U.S. land today takes about 2 weeks to drill on average. 5 years ago, it was about 3 weeks. The same well. 5 years earlier, I don't know the numbers, but I think it's probably was double that.
Yeah.
So it's been exponential, our ability to deliver these wells in a much more efficient manner. I mean, some basins today we're consistently drilling 20,000-foot wells in less than a week. And it's not unusual to see a 10,000-foot lateral section today drilled in 24 hours. Wow. And these are all results of applying these technologies. And when you apply these technologies to a large number of rigs drilling a large number of wells, this is how you scale that, use that technology and scale.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Mike, one of the things that I always appreciate, when looking at really the entire industry is really the level and willingness to adopt and innovate technology, but really overall just the idea of innovation. And so I kind of want to pose the question to you when you look at Patterson-UTI. How do you see the organization differentiating itself as an innovator?
Good question, Michael. It's innovation of technology is part of it. The application of the technology, I think, is going to be the real differentiator. So, we innovate a lot of technology. It's something that's very important to us. But it's an organization's ability to take that technology, create a culture of innovation within their organization, and use the technology effectively. I think that's going to be the real differentiator. And for us, that's critically important, is being able to develop technology that provides our customers with some value. So as an example, we have an in-house directional drilling company, MS Directional. We also have an in-house company called Superior QC, which provides service for wellbore steering. And being able to innovate those two services along with our rig equipment is a huge enabler, and it's something that's going to provide us with opportunities that maybe others don't have. But it only really works if we create a culture within the organization that embraces that, is enthusiastic about it, and implements it well. So I think that is the key. That's the bigger problem. That's the bigger issue, right? I mean, developing the technology, you can hire somebody to do that. It's developing an organization that has a culture that embraces it is where the real work comes in.
So one of the at the top of our conversation, I had the opportunity to read a little bit of your bio. I wanted to dive in a little bit. So when you started out, if I'm not mistaken, you actually started your career in the field as a tool pusher, I believe. Is that right?
I actually started as a roughneck. I graduated from high school in 1977. Went to work in the oil field. Roughnecked on rigs and kind of worked my way up. Found myself in a situation where many did, in the mid to late 80s, where there was no work to be found, and ended up going back to university at that point. So I was a non-traditional student, graduated from college at the age of 34, with the intent to go into a different industry. And as happens with many others, I got sucked back in. And so, interestingly enough, I had worked for a company called Global Marine, and I had been a driller for them offshore on a drill ship when the industry crashed, and went to college. And when I graduated, I ended up going back to work for them. So I never did leave the industry, but my education came, my formal education came after 10 years of experience working on rigs. Not your typical career path.
Well, good on you for continuing to embrace the waves as they came. I would say peaks and valleys, right?
It sucked you right back in.
Yeah. So maybe then, as you've seen, those waves and different areas of the industry, I'm sure that you've had the opportunity to see different forms of technology adoption. And so my question is, in your perspective and experience, where does it start? Where does technology adoption really start? And also, to a comment you made earlier, how do you really effectively implement that technology?
You got to be a little bit careful. With us, it starts with an idea and a desire to get something done, to accomplish something. And then we've got a technology team that takes those ideas and develops algorithms and applications and other things around that. And then we apply them to the rigs. We've got an application on our rigs we call Cortex. It's our automation platform. And so we're able to run these applications on our rig. The thing you've got to be very careful of is it can be a huge distraction to your organization. And what I mean by that is very often we get asked to do things, both internally and externally, and they all seem like good ideas. And if you too quickly jump to the next best idea, you sometimes don't get enough accomplished, and you end up with a very frustrated workforce. So it's very, very critical that you have a technology roadmap. You have a vision of where you want to go to, and you have discipline to stick to that roadmap, because it can be a very, very distracting path. Henry Ford once very famously said, if I would have asked them what they wanted, it was faster horses.
Yep.
And so you got to be very careful. Even sometimes when customers ask us for things, we have to really have a better understanding of what they want to accomplish, and maybe provide more elegant solutions to accomplish their goals, rather than just give people what they're asking for.
I like that. I think that falls in line with what you talked about earlier: discipline in the balance sheet, but also discipline in technology development, because there's lots of good ideas out there.
There is.
Yeah. I want to maybe talk a little bit about value and how Patterson-UTI adds value in today's environment. You talked about, and rightfully right on point, the fact that wells that used to take over a month to drill, less than a decade ago, today take a couple of weeks. So really your market's shrunk. Yet you said you've added directional services, you have superior QC for wellbore steering, and obviously pressure pumping services. Well placement is a big deal for operators. How do you find Patterson-UTI playing a role in that?
Good question. And and overall, to your point about the market shrinking, the one thing that's certain in life is change, and tomorrow will never look like yesterday. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to continue in our business, right? I mean, depending on who you ask, we're somewhere around 400 rigs operating on U.S. land.
Right.
I can remember not very long ago where we were at 2,000.
Right.
And I think there's, that, and tomorrow the number will be something different,
Yeah.
but it's never going to be what it was. And I think the market is going to continue to change.
Yeah. And
I think the key is we have to have a vision of being able to be successful in a changing market. So a big part of that, and I think we're really just on the leading edge of that when it comes to some of these technologies and what we can do with technologies to provide value to our customers. And when it comes to better well placement, it really starts with data. It all starts with data. You got to have good quality data, and then you have to have a process to manage that data and to do something with it. Yeah. And, so that we're very focused on that. We've got this Cortex platform that I mentioned earlier, and it's hardware that consists of an edge device. It's a server grade computer, and we've got SBCs on the rigs, and so that edge device is what we use to communicate. Mm-hmm. It pulls in data, it aggregates data, it communicates out data, and then you take that data and everything from every rig. We have data from all of our rigs streamed into to our performance center here in Houston. Mm-hmm. And then within that performance center in Houston, we do a lot of things. We can provide the data to our customers. We can provide them with raw data. We can provide them with near real-time reports and trends. We can also take the data and do things such as, Superior QC, as an example, takes the data and synthesizes it, aggregates it. And again, I'm not an expert on what they do, but I know what it looks like when it's done. They're able to provide a roadmap for the directional driller and predict the BHA behavior such that it really greatly minimizes the amount of sliding that takes place. Right. And when you reduce the amount of sliding, you just naturally reduce the tortuosity in the well. You increase overall ROP and these types of things. And unless you have good, high quality data and a process to use that data, you can't do that, right? So it all starts with the data. And we do a lot of other things with the data, but it's really all around having the data and being able to use the data. And then the same thing with the our directional service. We're developing applications and HMI screens in order to really optimize our rigs. We're in a unique situation because we have these rigs that we've spent a lot of money over the last decade retooling and upgrading these rigs and training our people. So we've got all that in place. And now we optimize the operating systems on the rigs to really utilize directional service and the steering service and these other things. That is the future. I'm old enough to remember a time before cell phones. I'm old enough to remember a time before GPSs. I remember driving around in my car and having maps in the door, and I pull maps out and look at them. And I remember pulling over and using cell phone or using payphones. It wasn't very long ago. And so then things evolved from there to where we have cell phones and we had GPS devices, but it only evolved to a point where the GPS devices, you had to go buy a third-party GPS device, then you had to plug it into your car and you had a standalone device, not very efficient. It achieved the objective, but it was not very efficient. Yep. Cell phones, you were not able to use them hands-free. So you went and bought a third-party device to allow it to connect to your vehicle. Again, it achieved the objective, not very efficient. And then we evolved from that to where you go buy a car today, that's all integrated into the vehicle. The hands-free device is integrated, the navigation system's integrated, and it's become a standard expectation. I don't know anybody that would buy a car that doesn't include that today. And I see that as a pretty good analogy of drilling an oil well. We have the drilling rigs and we can integrate this into the rigs. And I think in the future that will become the standard expectation. Right. That it will just be integrated in and it will reach the objective in a much more efficient manner. Great
answer. And I think business model wise, I'm guessing it's then becomes a matter of switching services on and off rather than full implementation, deployment, and upgrades.
It's exactly right. I mean, that's the reason they make chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry ice cream, right? Our customers all have different desires. Yep. And so we need to be able to provide them with the services that they like.
I have two follow-up questions on your answer, Mike. I'll leave the digital one for later. But I want to talk about the service integration aspect. It seems like Patterson's got all these capabilities in place. To what extent, where's the limit? How far can you go in integrating all these services? Can Patterson-UTI get more of the well construction, completion, production aspect of the well life cycle? Do you play a role in that?
I think so. I'm not smart enough to know what it looks like in the future, but it's going to be different than it is today. It's going to be much different than it was yesterday. So yeah, I think we're just scratching the surface, Assaad. I think we haven't even thought of the things that we're going to be able to see in the future. And hey, I'm very fortunate here, and I think others are the same way. I'm surrounded by a lot of really smart people, and they will be coming up with much better ideas than I can even imagine. And my job is to help provide them with the resources and the support they need to be successful. Right.
Right. And I heard from you about digital was that it's the next room for exponential growth. It's the next leap forward into the future, using what we have, leveraging that scale to taking things to the next level. Yet some still struggle to monetize that or to put a value on data or digitalization as a whole. How do you do that?
I don't know. And I think you're right. I think the whole industry is trying to figure that out, and we'll figure it out. I think it's so new that we just haven't figured it out yet. Right. But it'll come. It'll come, and I think we'll get it figured out. We will get it figured out. It's an interesting time though, because we're in such early days, and we have such free flow of information. Right. And my only hope is we don't do something to screw that up. And we've got to be, as an industry, we've got to be careful of that. We got to not get so protective of the data that we mess that up, because it's a wonderful time to be doing what we're doing right now. Yeah. I mean, we're innovating, we're using data, and there's enough data out there, and that, it's one of the things you got to be careful of. There's so much data, you can get into data overload, and everybody's got different uses for data. Our customers use different data in different ways than we do. NOV uses different data in different ways than we do. And we ought to be able, as an industry, to recognize that and structure it in such a way that we can all be successful, still maintain our competitive advantages against each other, but not stifle the whole industry because we get too much of a desire to control the data.
Right. Right.
So, Mike, as we're talking, I'm glancing over and I see that we have folks joining us from South America, North America. We have folks in Europe, all across, and it's interesting because to me that also represents a broad range of different applications and experiences and technologies. Yet one of the things that's almost consistent across all of those operations is the day rate model. And so I'm curious to know, just again, your personal perspective, why has the day rate model been so difficult to change?
It has been difficult to change. It's going to change. It is changing. We're actually seeing change. I think the reason it's been so difficult to change is because it's the easiest, simplest model, right? I mean, it's straightforward. It's easy to write into a contract. It's easy to follow. And so that has been the standard that we've used. It's not the best. It's not the most efficient, but it is the easiest and simplest to follow. And so that's the reason I think people have struggled to change it. I think the reason we've struggled to see change in that model is just control, right? With a standard day rate model, I know what I can control. Customer knows what they can control, and everybody knows what they can control. When you start moving away from that model, it requires trust, right? It requires trust. It requires collaboration. It requires giving up some control. And I think people just in general struggle with that. And so we got to figure out how to get beyond that. We got to be more trustful of each other. We've got to figure out how we can collectively help each other be successful. And it really starts with trust, right? And it's about having relationships with your customers. Because you look at a day rate model, it's a structure that is really it creates conflict. It's a structure designed around conflict, and we need to figure out how we create a structure that's more designed around trust and people both achieving their objectives and being successful. I think we'll get there. I really do. I'm happy to see that people are more enthusiastic about that these days.
And I'll echo your words on the fact that trust can make it happen. I mean, all the financial models or the justification or business analysis, that's only 10% of the road. I think if organizations can get their heads together and trust each other, then that's when things can exponentially grow.
Yeah. No, you asked earlier about this downturn. And you know, one of the things that has helped us through the downturn is we were very fortunate to have some term contracts with some very good customers. And our customers found themselves in a less than favorable situation also through this downturn. And through these relationships and through some trust, we were able to structure some scenarios with some customers that was very mutually beneficial. And I think we just need to figure out how to do more of that in the future, right? We need to figure out how to help each other through these tough times.
So last question for me, and I know Assaad has a follow-up question as well. One of the things that we hear about, especially as you look at organizations and start talking to the investment community, is the idea of ESG, or environmental, social, and governance initiatives. And so I know from time to time we get people asking on our show, hey, how does this company or that company look at ESG initiatives? So I wanted to pose a question to you. When you look at Patterson-UTI company, how do you all look at ESG initiatives in that space?
Yeah, good question, Michael. ESG is here to stay. That is my personal opinion and Patterson's opinion. It's here to stay. We have a sustainability report that we publish, and it's interesting. It's for a lot of reasons, it's the right thing to do. Things that are within the sustainability process. Some of the things that we're doing as an organization is focusing on our carbon emissions. So we've got biofuel rigs. These are rigs that run on a blend of diesel and natural gas. We've got rigs running on 100% natural gas. We've got rigs that are operating on electric power grids using transformers and burning zero hydrocarbons. And then we have the latest technology is something we call EcoCell, which turns a conventional rig into a hybrid rig. And so it's interesting. I said today is different than it was yesterday, and it'll be different tomorrow. A traditional rig on U.S. land has had 2 mud pumps and 3 gensets. That standard has changed over the last few years. The standard now appears to be 3 mud pumps and 4 gensets. And we believe that this EcoCell technology will actually replace that 4th genset. And what it is, it's a energy management system. It's got batteries in it. It stores energy. When you look at the loading of a drilling rig, it can be very transient, right? So you get these transient spikes, and so what you end up doing is running more gensets than you need in order to have enough spinning reserve to meet these transient loads as they come up. Well, this EcoCell system smooths all that out. It rather than have an engine running, you've got stored power in these batteries, and when you have a transient spike, it just picks them up. And so I think we're going to see a lot more interest in that type of technology. We've got one of our in-house companies called Current Power, which is doing the design work and the manufacturing of these systems for us. And so having that in-house ability, I think is critical, because it now ties in, as I was saying earlier, it ties into our control systems on our rigs. We've got another app that's called Genesis that ties with that. So the system monitors power generation and power demand and automatically turns engines on and off. You know, it's another thing we don't do very well. We run too many engines because people want to have extra power. Well, we have technology that can help us with that. They can turn engines off when we don't need them. It's kind of like me walking around my house turning lights off every day, right? And we have computers that can do that for us and turn engines off when we don't need them and turn them on when we do need them. And so there's a lot we can do with technology to help with our ESG objectives.
It's great to see you got, I mean, EcoCell sounds like it's shaving the peaks off, storing kinetic energy, recovering kinetic energy, so that you get rid of a big piece of investment, just get gensets out of the way. And that ends up being not just economically feasible, but also reduce fuel consumption and carbon emissions, which...
Exactly. And our customers typically pay for fuel, so it helps them in that regard also.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Mike, I believe you're also big on safety, and you've got you feel strongly about where we're at with that.
Okay. Appreciate you bringing that up, Assaad. You know, I'm very proud to be in this industry. I've been in it for quite a few years. And one of the things I'm most proud of is the safety journey that we have taken as an industry and as a company. Patterson had the best TRIR last year that we've ever had as an organization. Very proud of that. And the industry in general has seen the same trend. Very proud of that. You know, it's interesting. I mentioned I first worked on a drilling rig in 1978. And at the time, I clearly remember that experience. And I honestly believed that the driller I was working for at the time was intentionally trying to kill me. Actually, that's it, just through his actions and what we were doing. And we have changed so much as an industry. And you know, it's interesting. My daughter, when she was young, used to always tell me she didn't know what I did for a living. She really struggled to understand what I did for a living. And even today, I think she really doesn't know what I do for a living. And I remember when she was young, you know, I would leave for periods of time, right? I was working internationally and doing other things, and I would always come back home. And she had this blind faith that I was going to come home. And, you know, I think our employees are in a very similar situation. I think, you know, we have our employees, our field employees work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. They leave home, they go to work for 2 weeks. I think their daughters, their sons, their wives, their husbands, their mothers, their fathers very often have no idea what they do for a living. All they know is they go away for 2 weeks.
Yep.
And I think there's this expectation that these loved ones have that wherever their loved one is going, there's somebody there who's charged with taking care of them and making sure they get home safe. That is an implied expectation. And that responsibility bears directly on us. We are solely responsible for the well-being of our employees while they're in our care. And again, 40 plus years ago, that was not even a thought. And in our industry now, we all believe that. We have a moral imperative to the daughters, the sons, the wives, the husbands, the mothers, the fathers, to ensure that we take care of their loved ones while they're in our care. And that has just been probably the most significant change I've seen in our industry and the thing that I'm most proud of. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody in the industry for that. Because, you know, at the end of the day, we get paid to drill holes in the ground. And we don't have to hurt people to do that. Okay. And the most important thing we can ever do and the most important legacy we can ever leave is caring for the people that are entrusted to our care. So appreciate you bringing that up. So it's critical.
Yeah. So well said, and great to see that the industry is embracing that as a not just as a culture, but it's just a first, you know, a priority before anything else. And thank you for bringing that up and going through that with us. As much as I'd like to going through my questions, I don't want to hoard you for just me. I believe we've got some questions, Michael.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's no. It looks like folks are really having a great conversation in the chat, and so we want to bring some of those questions into our conversation here. So for that, we'll go ahead and bring Shelby Dumaine in to get some of those questions answered.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Hopefully
yeah.
Nothing that involves math.
I'll avoid the math ones, but yeah, I'm blown away as always. I don't know why I ever act surprised. Our audience is the best. So, but we got some great questions here, and I was actually going to start with another one, but your last answer, your comments on the changes in safety in the organization, kind of made me want to pull this one up that I was going to ask later. But we had Mike Tweedy on LinkedIn actually asked, what difference do you see in kind of the historic roughnecks versus today's workers, and what value does that difference add to the industry now?
Good question. Significant. I remember, again, joining the industry, and I was very, very much aware I was being hired from the neck down. In fact, I was told that when I was hired. Today is completely different, particularly from a technology and performance standpoint. I am constantly impressed with our employees on the rig and their focus on performance. And some of that's driven by the customers. Obviously, it's very important to them, but it's also we very much drive that internally. One of the things that we do is we take this data that I talked about, data coming in, data coming out. We actually have a standardized report that we give to our drillers every week. So we have a pre-structured pre-tower every day. So we push out pre-towers to the rigs. Every rig does the same pre-tower every day on every rig. And one of the things, and so we have different pre-towers every day. On Sunday, the pre-tower on every rig on Sunday is around performance. And we give every rig their own set of reports by driller on how that driller is performing relative to their connection times, or trip times, and these types of things. And so they actually have a performance conversation every Sunday, and they see how they perform relative to the other drillers on the crews, as well as the other drillers in their areas. And the real focus is around pre-planning. How well are we pre-planning these activities, and how well are we implementing the plans? It's not about running around fast. It's about having a good plan and following the plan, and then, the iterative process of coming up with a new plan. But when we go out to the rigs and talk to the employees, they're very focused on performance, which again, that was never like that in the past. Mm-hmm. So, and very, very focused on safety also. Very focused on calling timeouts for safety. We have programs where we recognize our employees for calling timeouts, and that's become very important to them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I did want to mention, we got a comment. Just I wanted to relay the message that I think it was Jack on LinkedIn said that you get major street cred from him for your history, your past work and everything you've done. He said that's a major street cred that you know what it's like and you've been there. But I want to ask this next question, also from LinkedIn. What about robotics? Do you think there will ever be manless operations for drilling?
I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing a lot of mechanization, and a lot of the mechanization is around moving people out of harm's way and keeping people safe. I think you get to the automation space. I think there's room for that. I think with automation comes repeatability and consistency, and so I think that's the next step.
Mm-hmm.
I want to, maybe just to your point, it's been so challenging to get the economics to work, but I think to one of the announcements we've made recently, kind of trying to get robotics on the rig floor to take some of these tasks, especially with running pipe or tripping in and out. It's something that we believe would probably come at some point, maybe later in the year. But definitely on the mechanization point, I agree with you, Mike, that there's quite a bit that can be done to get people out of harm's way.
Yeah, and this is one of the differences between onshore and offshore. Big difference. Offshore has adopted and implemented automation much more so than onshore, and for good reasons.
Yeah.
It's a different business. You know, we take a drilling rig and completely disassemble it and move it, sometimes once a week. And there are devices, and I think it's the technology of the robustness of some of the devices, right? So automation requires a lot of devices. The systems need to know where they're at in time all the time. Yeah. And so it takes a lot of devices, encoders and proximity switches and limit switches and these types of devices to tell the machine where it's at. And offshore, it has traditionally been much easier to protect these devices and keep them working, and therefore the automation runs well. Where on land, there are things that cause these devices to get destroyed, get broken, and these types of things. And so I think that has caused some resistance to automation. I think as we get better with more robust devices and processes to keep those devices working, I think the automation will come along.
Yeah, just for the record, that the robot I was talking about is for onshore rigs, but I'll stop talking before I get myself into trouble about that.
Well, just for the sake of time, we'll do one more audience question, and then we can go into our after show. But there's so many that I'm like, oh, I gotta squeeze in just at least one more, and for the main conversation. And this one comes from LinkedIn again, from Bassem. And, he mentioned Patterson-UTI already has directional drilling offerings. But what do you think about any further integration vertically of your directional drilling operations?
When you start talking about vertical integration of our corporation, that's somebody else other than me.
Fair answer.
I'm with the drilling company, and I'm happy to use whatever opportunities I have within our organization, but I can't speak to the plans for additional vertical integration.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely totally fair answer. I appreciate it.
Good question.
And we'll try to get a few more maybe audience ones squeezed in there for the after show that are maybe more just kind of casual, fun questions. But I wanted to get some of those main ones out there, so I appreciate you answering our audience's questions.
Okay, no, appreciate the questions.
Yeah, no, those were some really great questions from our audience. Certainly great responses and insight from you, Mike. Of course, that's the name of the show. That's why we try to be able to share and get that insight out. So, of course, you and Assaad, Shelby, and our audience for being a part of the main segment here in the Inside Out show. And so, as Shelby just alluded to, we're going to transition into the second part of our show here. So if you're able to stick around, we'd love to have you be a part and have some bonus content and conversation. But if you have to sign off, thanks so much for joining us. And we're going to now go ahead and tee up our after show starting right now. So here we are at the after show. Of course, our production team have Paul here with us, as well as, of course, Shelby, Assaad, and myself. I think we really can't do it without folks in the background really helping us out. So appreciate it. And again, for those that are joining us, this is our after show where we have some additional conversation and get a chance to ask a little more questions and insight from our guests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wanted to start off. So I mentioned I had kind of a fun question that I saw come in the comments, and I think maybe I like it because it is a little bit on the marketing side, but marketing kind of combined with just pride for the industry, which you mentioned you're proud of working in this industry. I feel the exact same. And Jack actually sent us a question in on LinkedIn asking if you think maybe the industry as a whole, or if you think we need kind of a public image a public relations company or group to kind of help with the public image. He mentioned that sometimes a lot of the naysayers or the negativity, they get to say whatever they want, and it kind of controls that narrative. But do you think there is a place to kind of give maybe a public image refresher for the industry? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think good question, Shelby. I think we should all do that. I think we all have a obligation to do that. And there actually are a lot of forums. I participate a lot with the IADC, and the IADC has we have a group in Washington. We do fly-ins. I've actually been blessed to participate in a few of these, and go to Washington and meet with legislators and their staff and try and influence them. And the approach that the IADC takes, which is a good one, is because when you go to Washington, it's very polarized. And many of the industry groups are seen to be on one side. And the IADC in their government affairs group has put a lot of effort into not being seen as necessarily a right-leaning group, and has reached out to a lot of people on the other side of the aisle and presented themselves as a resource. And so rather than going to Washington and saying you're wrong, the effort has been, we're here to help you. As you're creating legislation or you're creating a position and you don't quite understand all the aspects of it, please reach out to us. And so I think we need to have more of that. I think we need to have more people reaching across the aisle and trying to help each other see a different perspective. And so I'm really pleased with the approach the IADC has taken with that. Some of the other groups that are lobbying in Washington maybe don't take that approach, and so they don't even get a seat at the table, so to speak. They're not being listened to. And I think that's a general direction I think the whole world needs to take at this point. Telling each other what to do, and let's maybe have an open conversation about the pros and cons of what we're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think I tell people my age and friends all the time, how much the energy industry does for the world that you don't always hear about, and all the good that it is, like you mentioned, the safety that it brings and the advanced technology that everyone's working on. So I think that's absolutely true, is kind of coming together and talking about that more.
It's pretty amazing, and I would say disappointing, when you go sit with legislators and their staff and you start explaining to them how oil and gas plays a big part in their life. And they don't really understand that and realize it. There are people that actually think you just plug things into the wall and it's magic. And they don't. And so I think we need to be able to have conversations around how oil and gas has really benefited the entire world. And we actually have a moral obligation to continue to provide that, because once we take it away, the quality of life is going to suffer. And we need to be talking about that, and talking about it in a rational manner.
And last week's events, I think, were a big reminder to the importance of just that. Michael, for those like me who are still processing 2020, what advice do you have for staying sane in these difficult times?
That's a good way of phrasing it, I would say.
Yeah, I'm still stuck in December of 2020. I haven't recognized 21 yet. As I said earlier, we may look back at 2020 and think those were the good old days. I think things change, and they will change, and they continue to change. The thing we've got to, as a society, is figure out how to be more civil. I think that we all need to figure out that. I think the energy situation will figure itself out, and I think it will figure itself out once people learn how to become more civil with each other. I think, as you say, last week was a pretty good wake-up call. when you're having a conversation with somebody who's sitting in the dark without water, they become much more open to listening to other things, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've just got to be from an organizational standpoint and from a industry standpoint, we've got to be very disciplined. We're very optimistic about the future, but we've got to be disciplined in that future.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We can afford to do some of the things we've done in the past.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm gonna lighten it up a bit. Through all the whole last year, have you developed any newfound hobbies, any new practices or habits that you've implemented in your life? If we're talking about, methods for staying sane, I'm curious if you've developed any new patterns or life habits.
Good question. I'm very often accused of having too many hobbies, and a shortage of equipment is usually never a problem.
Right.
So nothing new for me. Although I think a lot of people have experienced this. I've particularly early on during the pandemic, I got to spend a lot more time with my family, which was a blessing. So I've got two children in university, and so both of them were home for an extended period of time, and we spent a lot of time together, and we learned that we can spend a lot of time together and enjoy it. And so I'll always look back on that with fond memories.
Yeah.
And but from a personal standpoint, not a lot has changed for me. We've got a lot of people at our house very often, and I try and enjoy my hobbies when I can.
Yeah.
From a business standpoint, we're all in a business that has continued to go, and we still travel. We've still got people out in the field. One of the things that has been very kind of enlightening to me is some of these technologies around internal communication. I was not thinking that some of this Zoom technology would be very effective. In fact, I was very concerned about the culture of our company as a result of not being able to communicate, and I think it's been the opposite. We communicate a lot more. And again, it's about the implementation of the technology. We talked about this a little bit earlier on. Within our organization, we do a lot of Zoom calls, and we used to have twice a year. We would have all the leadership come to Houston, and we would spend a week together and go over a lot of things. Very distractive to the organization, very expensive. We now have a monthly call where we'll have 90 people on a call. Because we've opened it up now because it's so much easier to include other people. We'll have 90 people on a call for an hour and a half, and we actually get much more accomplished because we're very strategic about what we cover in that hour and a half. We don't feel like we have to include Phil because everybody's come to Houston for a week. So very, very strategic, very intentional on what we cover. We're very intentional on people paying attention. So you will have your camera on, you will pay attention, and I can actually see 90 people. And I can interact with 90 people. Where you get 90 people in a room, you can't do that. You're interacting with 2 or 3 at a table you're sitting at, but with this technology, you can actually physically interact with that number of people. And then you're only distracted for an hour and a half and you go back to work. Much, much more efficient. So these types of things that we've learned and we've adopted will not go away. I think we'll continue to use these technologies. And I'm actually very excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. Yeah, you mentioned earlier two kids home from university. I'm just hoping you weren't staring at the back of an empty fridge, because I know how I was when I came back, and it was get out of the way because bad news bears. But no, that's great. I'm glad that you, like you said, you had those memories. Glad that you sound like you've been able to embrace the change as it's come. So really appreciate you sharing your perspective, Mike, and your thoughts. It's been a great conversation. Assaad, Paul, Shelby, appreciate all of your help in making this conversation happen. And of course, we are always greatly appreciative of our viewers for joining us here on Insight Out. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up our conversation today. Again, had the opportunity to speak with Mike Garvin, the Senior Vice President of Operations at Patterson Drilling Company. And so with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for this episode. And so for all of us here on the Inside Out Show and NOV, thanks for watching and for listening. And we will talk to you again next time.
Good show, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.